So our instructors are not only good home cooks, they are culinary and cultural lineage holders in their communities. They are the people at their church or at their mosque or in their community. So everybody knows, like, they're the best, find their food at the potluck.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Lisa Kyung-Gross is the founder and CEO of League of Kitchens, an immigrant-led, home cooking-based school that launched in New York in 2014. Their instructors are 14 mothers and grandmas from Indonesia, Mexico, Lebanon, Burkina Faso, and beyond. And now their culinary wisdom is being preserved in a new book, the League of Kitchens Cookbook. It's truly so special having Lisa onto the show to talk about how she finds these instructors and how the book came to life. Lisa Kyung-Gross, this is Taste. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to have you in the studio today to talk all about League of Kitchens and this new cookbook that y'all have made. But to start, can you tell me a little bit about just what kind of food memories you have from growing up and how food fit into your life?
Yeah, so my mom is Korean. She's a Korean immigrant. She immigrated in the early 1970s. My dad is American of Hungarian Jewish descent, and his family came to New York City in the 1890s. So I always think, like, I'm half Jewish New Yorker, half Korean. And my Korean grandmother actually lived with my family when I was growing up and took care of me. We shared a room till I was 8. She cooked tons of food all the time, was like the primary cook in our home. So definitely my childhood food memories are colored by both those ancestries and both those families. So a lot of eating Korean food. Every dinner we had Korean food on half the table, and we had vaguely Westernish food that my grandmother made for my dad, who likes Korean food, but also I think didn't want to eat it every night. So my dad always used to joke our table had a 38th parallel, which is the line that divides North and South Korea. But also I grew up really close with my Jewish grandparents who lived in New York, and they were super into restaurants and eating out and food, and were kind of like 80s gourmets in a way. And so with them growing up, they used to take me out to lots of restaurants, and I love trying new food. And actually, one of the things I write about in the book is my Jewish grandmother really wanted to encourage me to try new food. So we did this thing where she would always order something off the menu I knew I liked, and then I would order just a new thing I wanted to try. And then if I didn't like it, we could switch. So things like that really encouraged me to be adventurous when I ate out.
Yeah, I loved reading a little bit about this background in the introduction to the book. And obviously there's just this divide we're talking about in terms of cuisine, but also like home cooking versus restaurant cooking, which I think are like two very different kinds of ways that people eat. And like certainly in the work of League of Kitchens, it seems that you really kind of champion home cooking and like what home cooks are capable of.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think for me, I gained exposure to a lot of different cuisines through going out to restaurants, because I didn't have home cooks in my life from all over the world. But I also really got to see how a cuisine is different in the home. Like the food my grandmother made at home was different from food we had at Korean restaurants. And so that gave me some insight into how that can be different.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why it maybe was different is that, everyone has their own personal traditions that they carry on. But also it seems that your grandma was making like not only full meals, but the ingredients that the meals are made up of. And so obviously things would taste different if those core building blocks are being made at home as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my Korean grandmother lived at a time in Korea where when she was young and had a family, she made everything from scratch, like in community with my mom's sisters, with her extended family, with the community, like making their own soy sauce, their own gochujang, their own doenjang, obviously all their kimchi. They did like a huge kimjang every fall where you make like huge, huge jars of kimchi every fall. But when I was growing up in suburban Maryland, she wasn't doing that. However, she did make all our kimchi. I write in the book about how one of my strongest food memories from growing up was how my grandmother would put newspapers on the floor of our kitchen and sit on the floor, which is how people traditionally cooked in Korea, and just fill these huge plastic tubs with cabbage to make kimchi, and, chopping on the floor with the cutting board on the floor, putting on yellow gloves to mix it all. So, kimchi was something she always made, and always made several kinds. And then she would also make ganjang, gaejang, which is soy sauce cured crabs. And that's another super strong childhood food memory where I remember my grandmother, who was maybe 4'9", if that, taking live crabs and washing them under the faucet and sticking them into a jar as they climbed up the side, poking them down with a chopstick and pouring boiling soy sauce on top of them. So it's funny, I've looked up recipes for that because I've never made it and I wanted to. And nowadays they all say, like, put them in the freezer for a bit so they're not moving. And, but my grandmother, she
didn't have time for
took
that.
those live. To her probably was also like, you want it to be fresh. This is the freshest way.
Yeah, I really respect that. I went crabbing for the first time recently, and it is really scary to be around a bunch of live crabs at once, actually.
Yeah.
And being worried about being pinched and all of that.
Totally.
So I think all of this kind of is really great context for League of Kitchens and the work that you do. And I'm wondering if you could just take a step back and just explain what League of Kitchens is for someone who doesn't know about it, and maybe how that idea came to you.
Yeah, so League of Kitchens is a culturally immersive cooking school in New York City and online, where all of our instructors are immigrant women who are exceptional home cooks, and they teach their family recipes in workshops in their home kitchen. So you go to their homes all across New York City, you're a guest in their home, and then you're with, 4 to 6 people, you're learning to cook their family recipes with them.
How do you find these exceptional home cooks? I'm imagining you with an encyclopedia of every grandma in New York, and you're just making your way through.
I wish that existed. That would make it
You're
easier.
Working on it, yeah.
Yeah. So we actually opened for business about 10 years ago. So this is our 10-year anniversary year, which is cool because the cookbook's coming out this year. And that in some ways is the most challenging thing, finding the right people, because, it's just the instructor and her students. Like, I'm not there. We don't have staff there. And I knew from the beginning that having really exceptional people was going to be the key to the success of this. So our instructors are not only good home cooks, they are incredible home cooks who do everything using traditional techniques and methods from scratch. So I always say, they are culinary and cultural lineage holders in their communities. They are the people at their church or at their mosque or in their community, so everybody knows, they're the best. Find their food at the potluck. And so how do we find them? We have some relationships with different organizations like the IRC, the International Rescue Committee. We found a few instructors through them. We found a few instructors through the Center for Family Life in Sunset Park. They have different co-ops. But then a ton have just come to us in these synchronistic ways. Like, our Greek instructor is the mom of a friend of a friend. Our Uzbek instructor, her friend in Uzbekistan is a food writer and had heard about us and told her. I was actually on Japanese television many years ago, and our Japanese instructor saw it, and she actually contacted NHK to get our information rather than Googling us, which is very sweet.
It's very grandma way to do it, I guess.
Totally. I always feel like it's kind of synchronistic when we find the right person, because also they have to be great hosts. They have to be comfortable hosting strangers in their homes. They have to enjoy that. They have to be comfortable talking about their culture and their stories. And so for the right person, it's ideal, but it's a specific kind of thing, to find that right person.
Yeah, and also the last thing I would do would be to disparage an elder, but I think a lot of people think their food is the best, and it isn't necessarily always is. So do you go to someone's home and eat a meal with them?
Yeah. So basically, the way we do hiring, we have 14 instructors right now. Over the last 10 years, I've interviewed hundreds of people, and I've done, at this point, I'd say close to 70 or 80 in-home cooking auditions.
Wow.
Where I go to someone's home, I cook with them, I eat with them, I get to know them better. And there are just certain tells when I can tell they're going to be a good League of Kitchens instructor. And just one is that they do everything from scratch, and they love doing that, and they take a lot of pride in that. And I mean, of course, if they're tired on a Wednesday night, they make an egg for themselves or whatever. But they love cooking. Cooking is an expression of who they are. And across the board, it's sort of eerie. They all say, the most important ingredient is love. And I am always like, okay, that might be a good sign that you would be a good candidate.
Yeah, I feel like there's such a trope that mom's cooking, grandma's cooking is the best. And obviously, I think you must see some value in that because that's the core of this business. Like what do you think people gain from learning from these women who are kind of carrying on these food traditions, but who maybe don't have quote unquote professional cooking
Yeah.
experience?
Well, first of all, I will say not all moms and grandmas are good cooks.
Yeah.
Like my mom, actually. And that's actually part of the founding story, which is my Korean grandmother was a wonderful cook. But whenever I wanted to cook with her when I was a kid growing up, she would always say, oh, don't worry about cooking. You should go study. Studying's more important. And I think for her, she didn't really value her own cooking skills. And she really wanted me to have professional and educational opportunities that she didn't have, that she would have loved to have had. And also, now that I'm a mom, I also see it kind of slows you down when you're cooking with kids. So it's probably
Definitely.
also like, let me just get this done. That was part of it. But so I didn't learn to cook from her. And actually, neither did my mother because she's the youngest of 6. And so her older sisters all learned. And when she was coming up, my grandmother also said to her, study, do something else. So actually, my mom really doesn't like cooking and is not a very good cook.
Yeah, my grandmas also are not good cooks necessarily, and I always felt like I was kind of missing out on
Yeah.
something because everyone does talk about grandma's food being the best.
Totally. Well, so what led me to start the League of Kitchens was, after college, I was living on my own, really starting to cook for myself for the first time and fell in love with cooking. And I wanted to cook these recipes from my childhood. And my grandmother had passed away by that time. And so I tried to teach myself how to cook Korean food from cookbooks and the internet because I couldn't really learn from my mom. And nothing tasted as good as when she made it. And I just realized there's so often these little nuances or tips or tricks or ways of doing things that often get left out of cookbooks or videos, though not our cookbook. And we'll talk about that. And so often those are also sensory based and it's easier to learn from a person. And, to me, what I've realized is it's not so much that being a mom or grandmother makes you a good cook. What I've realized is that when you look at culinary traditions around the world, there are basically 2 streams. There's court cooking, there's the food of the aristocracy, and then there's peasant cooking, which is what everybody else eats. And so in most parts of the world, for most of history, women are the ones who have done the domestic cooking. Not for special occasions, not for the temple, not for big outdoor fires, but that everyday, day in, day out cooking happens in the home, and it's mostly been done by women. And so if you want to look for culinary tradition and culture and knowledge, it's in the home. And because it's been a mostly oral tradition passed down in the home between women, it's been very under-recognized and undervalued and underappreciated. So it's not so much that all grandmas or moms are good cooks. It's there's a certain kind of cooking and culinary knowledge that happens to be found often in these relationships between women or in women in the home. And that's what I want to kind of help celebrate, capture, preserve, share. And it's it happens to be mostly moms and grandmas that have that knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I think on this line of preservation, another point that you kind of distinguish in the book is that all of your instructors are immigrants. And obviously, here in New York, there are lots of people who come from these different cultures and traditions who have been in the country for a while. Why do you focus specifically on having all of your instructors be immigrants?
Yeah, well,
recent immigrants, I guess.
Yeah, so all of them have immigrated themselves.
Yes.
And so all of them had experience in their countries of origin cooking, where I think in the US, because of industrialization, modernization, a lot of different things, a lot of traditional cooking techniques and methods have been lost. And there's been much more of a focus on convenience, on speed. It's obviously a complex thing.
Yeah, also access, not all of the traditional ingredients are available here still.
That's true too. So, but all of our, and again, when you talk to our instructors, not everybody from their family is a great cook. They are the ones that since they were children loved cooking, were interested in cooking, wanted to learn, wanted to hang out in the kitchen. They had a kind of interest and passion for it and skill and talent for it. But all of them tell these wonderful, beautiful stories about cooking with their families. Our Uzbek instructor talks about how when she was growing up, all the weddings were cooked by the family, and all the weddings had like 500 people. And there was this process where, as you would kind of almost go through this like apprenticeship process, where like when you were until you were 8, you would bring stuff to people who were like cooking for the wedding, and then you would get a different job, and then you get a different job until you could cook all the dishes. Like even her son talks about learning to make plov, which is like the festive rice meat dish, at all these weddings starting when he was a kid, just like bringing firewood and then getting to do the next step. And he's in his late 30s. He's kind of the last generation to have gone through that experience in Uzbekistan because, the whole world is industrializing, globalizing, et cetera. And not just here, but everywhere, a lot of these traditions are being lost.
I really love this idea of apprenticing to the family and like moving your way up through the stations of like the fine dining restaurant that is like cooking for the family wedding.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the cookbook because I think it's so special, and also it must have been just a really interesting exercise to think about like how do you combine all of these culinary traditions. You have recipes from 14 different instructors from 14 different places.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the idea for this book first come about, and how did it kind of evolve over the development process?
So when I first started the League of Kitchens, and I should say I keep getting distracted from the story of the founding, but basically I had that experience of wanting to learn Korean food, feeling frustrated with cookbooks on the internet. And I had this fantasy of, I wish there was another Korean grandmother that I could cook with and learn from and cook with in her home kitchen and learn her family recipes. So I kind of stored that idea away, and then I actually ended up doing an MFA in social practice and participatory public art. And I came back to New York, and that idea came back to me. And I thought, well, what if I could find exceptional home cooks from all around the world who could host these kinds of workshops in their home kitchens? And it could be just as much about this experience of cross-cultural learning and connection and exchange as it was about this amazing eating, culinary learning experience. So, I knew, so basically we tried to find instructors any way we could, as I mentioned earlier, like we connected with some organizations, we posted on Craigslist, we, word of mouth, and then over the years, as people saw press, they also contacted us. So the 14 instructors we have and the 14 cuisines we offer are based on the individuals that I found, because it's really about finding these exceptional individuals. So not all of these cuisines I necessarily set out to want to represent, but I knew from the very beginning when we started that I wanted to do a cookbook. And it was a question I got immediately, like as soon as I started the company 10 years ago, like, are you going to do a cookbook? But actually, it feels like the exact right time. It feels like it took us a long time, and there were lots of twists and turns to getting there. But this cookbook is the cookbook it is because it took 10 years to get here.
Yeah, and you were building the bench, and I have the list of 14. Maybe I'll read it off here for context. Okay, so your instructors in this book and at League of Kitchens are from Mexico, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Ukraine, Greece, Afghanistan, India, Argentina, Japan, Uzbekistan, Lebanon, India, and Nepal.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct? Okay. Incredible, like UN of cookbooks to have together. And how long is like the range of how long they've been working with you?
Yeah, so of our 14 instructors, so I've hired 3 additional who retired. So out of 17 people I've hired in the last 11 years, 14 are still with me, with the company. And it's really like this family that's grown over time. Like we have our own WhatsApp group. Everybody's always wishing each other happy birthday and happy Eid and happy Diwali and happy all the holidays, and inviting each other to their homes. And that's something I hoped for, but I couldn't make happen, that happened kind of organically. But yeah, it feels pretty amazing to have such a diversity of cuisines. And yet, if you meet all of them in a group, there is this common thread where they're just all so warm, and they love hosting people, and they love sharing, and they love cooking as an expression of their love. And their food's incredible. Like when you eat their food, you're like, oh my God, you're like overwhelmed with how good it is.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting to see the way the book is organized also, because you could have done it like by cuisine, but instead it's by kind of like category of dish. And where did that approach come from?
Yeah, so actually, we did a different cookbook proposal like 8 years ago where it was organized by cuisine and by instructor. And it didn't end up selling. And I had this insight a couple of years later where actually I was cooking from Melissa Clark's dinner cookbook, which is organized in a similar way to ours. So there's a chicken chapter, a beef chapter, a salads chapter, and her recipes are very diverse, because I think that's the way we cook now, right? And I had just this idea of like, oh, we could do this. We could organize our cookbook like this, which is, I think, how people actually cook. Because I knew I wanted this cookbook to be really practical and accessible. And I do think most people say like, oh, I have some chicken. What do I do with it? Or like, oh, I'm making chicken. I need a vegetable side that's not roasted broccoli, And so having it be organized like this, I think makes it much more accessible to actually cook from.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm also curious about the recipe writing process. I think there's this trope, especially with especially with like older cooks, that like nothing is ever measured or written down. Was that something that you encountered?
Yes. So that was really interesting. So I co-wrote this book with Rachel Wharton, who's an amazing veteran cookbook co-writer, food writer, writes for taste. And so what she and I did is we set up Zoom cooking sessions with each instructor. And this whole method was sort of born out of the pandemic, where first we mailed each instructor a digital scale, like volume measuring cups, liquid measuring cups, measuring spoons, a ruler, everything. They had that with them. They would send me a list of what ingredients we needed for the dish we were going to be working on that day. And then basically we would do this Zoom call that was like a mini cooking lesson where they would do a step, I would do a step, and we would stop and make them measure everything, which kind of drove them crazy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Like, okay, you chop that onion. Can you measure each piece with the ruler? Can we, let's weigh the onion before we cut it. What is it in grams and ounces? Okay, you chopped it. Okay, what's the volume? How many cups? Okay, it's about 1.5 cups. Great, moving on. And then we recorded those videos. And so, what was great about that is I think when you're just watching someone cook, you don't notice what you're not noticing. But when you're cooking along, so often, I would have a moment where I'd be like, oh, what's the flame here? Did you lower the flame? They'd be like, oh, yeah, I lowered it. I was like, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Like, lower it here. Or I'd be like, oh, is the top on or off? And they'd like, oh, it's on. And those little details make a huge difference in how something comes out. So then Rachel would take the videos, she would watch them over and over again and write the recipe from that. And then I would take the written recipe, I would cook it again, I would send her lots of notes and questions, we would rewrite it, and then we would send it to the instructor to look over and they'd give us their comments. So we really tried to capture all the details and nuances. And we actually say in like a note about the recipes, it's sort of ironic because they don't use measuring anything. They do everything by feel. If with many of them, if you're like, is that 2 garlic cloves or 4? They're like, whatever you want. It's up to you. And I really said over and over again, we want these recipes to taste like your food. So what do you do? People will change it how they want, but we want to convey exactly what you do. So if someone cooks through this recipe measuring everything, it will taste like your food. And I hope and think that we accomplished that with these recipes.
It's such a gift to the world, but also I imagine to the families of these women who maybe have been trying to get versions of these recipes written down for a while.
Exactly. Totally. Completely. And, and we say in the book, like, cook it exactly the first time. You'll learn a lot. So the recipes are quite long and detailed because, again, we're a cooking school. We really wanted the recipes to be instructional. And then we want the food to taste as good as the instructor's food. And then people can alter it, second, third time through however they want. But the thing I kind of hate when recipes for cuisines that I'm unfamiliar with are kind of vague, because so often, I haven't necessarily even eaten this dish. I don't know. I'm not aiming for something. I don't know how it's supposed to turn out. And I often feel like I feel kind of not supported in this process. And so, our cookbook, in some ways, it goes against this current trend of a lot of cookbooks where cookbook authors are like, I want it to be loose. I want people to feel free. I want people to feel confident. But I would say if you're cooking a cuisine that you didn't grow up with and you haven't cooked before, your instincts aren't going to be that good because you haven't done it. You don't know what you're looking for. It's kind of this, to me, this false confidence in a knowledge that most people don't have, like an instinct. And again, if you're like an accomplished restaurant chef, you probably can fudge it and just make it work. But as a home cook, especially cooking a cuisine that's unfamiliar, I think there is a benefit to having a lot of detail.
Yeah, and I think some of those details, like how to properly wash rice, for example, like those are the things that set apart grandma cooking because they've been
Totally.
doing it for so long that
Yes.
like they don't even necessarily think to say it.
Right, exactly. And so that was a lot of my role too, putting myself in that not knowing beginner's mind home cook who's never cooked Indonesian food before and just asking those quote unquote dumb questions, where sometimes they'd be like, well, you just do it like this. And I'd be like, okay, but why? Or like, do you ever do the other? Kind of, I think for them too, it made the process of writing these recipes with us made them think about what they do in a new way, or even to become aware of it, of like, oh, yeah, I guess I do that for that reason. Or like, I guess my mom used to do it for that reason, but I didn't really know.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious about what the photo shoot process was like. Also, it seems that you were getting very like personal with everybody and like going into their homes even.
Yes. So the photo shoot experience was actually very unique. So as you know, most cookbooks, the way they do the photos, they shoot them in a studio and a stylist will cook all the food and the props will be rented. That's very typical. So I knew that I wanted the photos to really express our instructors, their families, their homes, their food. So what we did is we actually did 14 different shoots in 14 different locations in each instructor's home across New York City. And the instructors cooked the food themselves, and we used their dishes, cutlery, table, textiles, everything to style the photos. And we had an amazing team. We worked with Kristen Teague, our photographer, and Monica Perini, who was our stylist, who were really excited about this process because I definitely talked to photographers who were like, I can't do that.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah. And also that because we, at each shoot, not only were we doing beautiful shots of the food, we also had them invite their friends and family. And we did lots of photos of the table and them eating with their families. So we needed a photographer who was happy to do both, which Kristen is,
Yeah.
which was amazing.
And there's portraits, also really beautiful ones of all of the recipe developers.
Yeah, exactly. So like their portraits, their families. And I felt like that was so important too, because another aspect to what we do is really sharing the cultural context of food and recipes. So each recipe starts with a quote from the instructor, which I love, so that we have their voices. And in the head notes, we really focused on sharing, like, when is this food eaten? What are the customs and traditions around it? Also, what are the accompanying foods eaten with this dish? Because I feel like that's something that's often left out of cookbooks and even at restaurants, unless you know to order certain dishes together. You may not, but like that combo is the dish.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, like our Lebanese instructor's fool, which is this fava bean kind of mashed dish. She always says it's very important to serve it with a full plate of extras. And this is how you judge whether someone's a good cook or host or not. So that's like cut up peppers, onion, mint, parsley, radishes, all arrayed beautifully, scallions. And you take a bite of the fool, which is like a bean dish, so it's kind of pasty, like all beans, and then you take a bite of one of these fresh vegetables, and that's the dish. Like if you only eat the beans with pita, that's like, 60% of the experience. But so often, if someone just finds a recipe for fool and they make it, they don't mention that plate of extras. It's really like an extension of the recipe.
Yeah, I think that is such a great detail on what you gain from having people who are really like cultural torchbearers sharing these recipes. Is I know certainly I've made things before that I haven't thought about what to pair them with, because even just making something new is like, that's my cooking for the day,
right? Right. But so often, like the accompaniment is something simple like that. It's interesting. Oftentimes it's like an onion or fresh vegetable, because it kind of cuts and balances the other flavors. But even just, a big part of what we do in each recipe is we also, the way we chose the recipes in the book, we're making sure that recipes that went well together as a meal were in the book. Because one thing I also love sharing is about sort of classic meals, like fish and chips of every culture. Like there's certain things that are always served together. So, for instance, like our Mexican instructor shares her recipe for picadillo, like ground beef and potato dish. And she always serves it with Mexican tomato rice, black beans, sliced avocado, and fresh cheeses like queso fresco. And then she likes to also put sliced bananas on the rice, which her babysitter used to do when she was growing up, which I love because it cuts the spiciness. But something about having that full plate of all those things together, it just enhances the pleasure of each individual item.
Yeah, I love that. And I actually make picadillo at home like quite often as a comfort food in the winter, but I've never done it with rice and bananas like that. So my eyes just got so wide.
Totally. And again, a detail like that, like adding sliced bananas, it's not hard. You just have to know to do it.
Right. Someone has to tell you.
Yeah, exactly. And so many things like that we tried to capture in the book. And even, some of the recipes, for instance, like our Afghan instructor shares this turmeric egg recipe. It's the recipe that's the easiest one in the book. I make it multiple times a week. My kids love it. Probably most people listening have all the ingredients at home. Basically, what you do is you take ghee, you slice up some garlic, fry the garlic in the ghee, you add a pinch of turmeric, and then you fry an egg over easy in it. And it's delicious. It's fast. You could use olive oil or butter if you don't have ghee. It's so few ingredients. And you would never think to do that unless you had it, right? And that's an example of a dish, too, where Noita, when we talked to her about it, she's like, that's not even a recipe. Like, why would you put that in a cookbook, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I'm always interested in those kinds of recipes because unless you grew up in an Afghan family, you wouldn't know about that egg. But it's something that's so easy, fun, delicious, pleasurable. And like, I love sharing that, because that's something anybody can do and it's delicious.
I love hearing about this as a recipe that you make at home because I would imagine that the just variety and deliciousness of food coming out of your home must be so high. And it's been a decade that, this has been a part of your life. How has your home cooking evolved in this past 10 years?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So when I launched the company, I was actually pregnant with my older daughter. I have two daughters who are 10 and 7. So in a way, my older daughter, Sylvie, was like born at the same time as League of Kitchens.
They're twins,
yeah. No, so I have a 7-year-old and a 10. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
10-year-old. Yes, exactly. League of Kitchens and my 10-year-old are twins.
Yes.
Exactly. It's her other sister. And so my kids have grown up in the League of Kitchens, which is so cool because the instructors have known them both since they were babies. And they have this community of aunties from all over the world who love them. And, all through their childhoods, I've either been cooking foods at home or bringing home foods from events or the instructors' homes for them that they've grown up with. So meaning like when you become a parent, you often start cooking a lot more at home because there's just greater necessity. So it is interesting that I feel like becoming a parent coincided with starting League of Kitchens. So I just did a lot more home cooking than I did before that. And I've become a lot better. I mean, for me, it's been a dream of just like my personal education, in the kitchens of these incredible women, learning so much.
Yeah, I would imagine it's probably a nice like side effect of having the business and the baby at the same time as there is this like bench of aunties that want to love these kids and like spend time with them as well.
And like our Indian instructor made me these incredible like Indian lactation bars after I had both kids, which were so great. And also even just, some of the things we talk about in the book are home remedies from the kitchen. Actually, I did interviews with each instructor and I love hearing the home remedies from the kitchen from each culture. Like, that's so fun. And, I've learned a lot about that.
Yeah. Are there any home remedies that you've picked up and now do at home?
Yeah. Well, also we talk about beauty tips from the kitchen, too, which is also fun.
So good.
Well, one thing that's super simple I learned from our Indian instructor, Yamini, and she has a lot of like Ayurvedic home remedies, is if you have a cold, just to take a little turmeric and some black pepper and mix it with some honey and just suck on that. And it's so soothing and just like great for when you have a cold.
I love that. I feel like my bench of cold remedies, I'm always trying to grow. I'm normally like boiling ginger and turmeric and black pepper and doing a tea like that.
Yes. Well, our Indonesian instructor, her quote is like, every Indonesian home remedy is a combination of turmeric and ginger, basically.
It's a good place to be, I guess.
Totally.
So I can't help but ask, like, the whole idea for originally starting League of Kitchens was that you wanted to find a Korean grandma to learn to cook from. Did you ever find her? Is she still out there?
So it's sort of ironic, right? One of our founding instructors was a wonderful Korean woman, but she was actually at that time already in her late 70s. And I think she retired after about 3 years because it just sort of got too much for her to like do the hosting and the cooking and the cleaning up and all that stuff. So we are looking for a Korean instructor. In fact, I'm always looking to hire new people. So anyone listening, if they have any candidates, we need people who live in New York City.
Yeah, what else does your dream candidate have? We're putting out a call in the air right now.
Totally. So, excellent home cook using traditional techniques and methods. Warm, charismatic, loves hosting, loves cooking for people, comfortable, teaching in English, though their English doesn't have to be, perfect by any means. Like when our Lebanese instructor, Jeanette, started, she was always like, Lisa, my English is so bad. And I'd be like, no, it's fine. And you know what makes your English much better? Teaching 4.5-hour classes to groups of Americans in English.
With like a captive audience who is already obsessed with you and wants to eat your food and very patient.
Exactly. So it's kind of like a great way to improve your English. But anyway, comfortable teaching in English. And they live in New York City. And they're comfortable hosting groups of American strangers in their homes.
So Korean is like one kind of dream on the list. Are there any other cuisines or cultures that you're especially looking for right now?
Yes. I mean, there's so many. Again, we had a Trinidadian instructor. She retired. I'd love like Trinidadian or West Indian instructor. I'd love to find a Chinese instructor. I'd love to find like a Brazilian instructor, a Peruvian instructor, a Moroccan instructor. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
there's
picturing
just so
like
many.
this going out across New York City from where we are in Midtown Manhattan.
The bat call, like, immigrant grandmas, please come.
Yeah, there are all of these like aunties with like the carts going down the street that are stopping right now with all of their groceries.
They're like, I sent something. I'm being called.
Well, I have a feeling we will probably hear from folks after this episode airs, and I will be sure to send all of the emails.
Well, the other thing I'll say, too, is not everyone has to technically be your mom or grandma. Okay. Like our Afghan instructor, our Mexican instructor, when I hired them, they were in their 30s, but they cooked like grandmas. And what I mean by that is, for instance, like our Afghan instructor, when she got married, she lived in a large household of 35 people, and she cooked at least one meal a day for 35 to 45 people every day for 10 years.
Wow.
So like that comfort and ease and confidence and depth of knowledge. Like, so actually we have merch, and one of our slogans is cook like a grandma, because it's sort of, I always say it's sort of like a state of mind. It's a kind of an attitude, as you don't have to be old. You don't have to have children or grandchildren,
Yeah, I think one of the things I always say about getting older is that I'm really looking forward to getting older because my cooking is just going to become better and better because it's more years of practice under the belt. So I really aspire to cook like a grandma, and I think I have to get this merch maybe.
Yeah, I'd love to send you some. But I think another thing, one of the other questions we ask in their interviews in the book is, what do you think is a secret to becoming a great cook? And I think one thing that everyone says that I agree with is you have to love to eat. Because you have to know what tastes good, so that you can make your food taste good. So I think that's a big part of it. And then just the practice, right? I think that's the thing too, becoming a parent, just having to cook every day in a way that I didn't before. Just that has made me such a better cook.
Yeah, definitely. I want to play a little rapid fire to close, but before we do, we talked about this idea of like cooking with love a little bit before, and I feel like when you see that on like the back of like a package of like processed cookies, like it's just so kind cheesy. It's so cheesy, but like I do think there's something legitimate behind that. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if you've thought about like what cooking with love actually like looks like in practice.
Yeah, totally. And actually that's our other merch tagline. Cook with love and cook like a grandma. So yes, so I know it sounds like a cliche. We've all heard it a million times. What does it mean? But as I said, all of our instructors say it and believe it. So I've actually thought a lot about what I think this means. So to me, it's cooking with intention and attention. And it's thinking about the person you're cooking for that you love. And when you love someone, you want to make them something they'll enjoy and that will make them happy. And that makes you put extra effort and extra attention and you shape it to their taste. And it's just, again, it's like you pay more attention and you're more intentional in the way you're cooking and the decisions you make and the way you plan your menu and how and you're bringing that like passion, that desire to make something delicious, to share it, to express your love that way, to show care. And I think when you put that care into cooking, it's going to taste better. And that to me is what it means to cook with love.
Couldn't have said it any better.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to do a little rapid fire to close, and I'm going to make you play favorites, so I'm sorry.
Okay, I know, it's hard.
Okay, your favorite style of cuisine to cook right now?
It's funny, I've actually been cooking Hungarian Jewish food from Jeremy Solomon's recent cookbook because, as I mentioned, part of my heritage is Hungarian Jewish. So it's funny, last night I made chicken paprikash.
I love that. And I think it's a good time of year, like Jewish holidays, like cozy fall, all of that.
Actually, we just hosted a break fast party for Yom Kippur, and I also made his whitefish salad and his cured salmon, which were both great. So
those are like breakfast classics.
Exactly.
I love it. Your favorite cookbook that's not the League of Kitchens cookbook?
Yeah, so I actually have close to 1,000 cookbooks. I'm a very passionate cookbook collector. Yeah, so I kind of feel like the fact it took 10 years to write this cookbook, I also read and cooked from so many cookbooks. It was like doing a PhD in cookbooks and how they work. So this is hard. Okay, for reading and uniqueness, I will say A Tale of 12 Kitchens, which is written by a British graphic designer, Jake Tilson. It's incredible. It's like collage, biography. That's super unique. I also love Nigella Lawson's first cookbook, How to Eat. It's like, to me, the epitome of the perfect cookbook chat. I love a lot of British cookbooks like Rachel Roddy's My Roman Kitchen. I love that cookbook. I'd say for actually cooking from, I love Bottom of the Pot by Naz Daravian about Iranian cooking. Like every recipe I've cooked from that has turned out great. I love Korean Home Cooking by Sohee Kim, which is also co-written by Rachel. Like that's my go-to Korean cookbook. I really feel like that cookbook, when I cook from it, it tastes close to my grandmother's cooking. Also, My Korea by Hooni Kim is my other favorite Korean cookbook. His is more chefy, but I like incorporating some of his chefy touches. Also, Japanese farm food I love because, again, it's very by Nancy Singleton Hashisu is very like home-cooked Japanese food, which is so different from restaurant food. Also, Fuchsia Dunlop's Simple Chinese Cooking, again, like really home-cooked Asian food. And also, I love Mina Stone's cookbooks. She's a friend of mine, and I love that it's like Greek grandma cooking with a little bit of this like cool edge.
Yeah. Okay. I love how I asked you for one and you said 15, but if you have 1,000, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
How do you organize all of the cookbooks?
Oh my God. They're just everywhere in our apartment.
Okay. That makes me feel better. If you were going to say alphabetized, that would be next level.
They're not organized. They're stacked. They're overflowing. Actually, I saw this really funny sign that said, "It's not hoarding if it's books." And I was like, I that speaks to me.
Okay. Your favorite New York City restaurant?
Okay, again, this is an impossible question. I love going out to eat breakfast because, again, when you have kids, it's harder to go out and eat dinner. Mm-hmm. So my 3 favorite breakfast places in New York right now, one is Davel, which is a Japanese cafe in the Lower East Side. It's like kind of Japanese Western blend. They have amazing uni spaghetti and these toasts.
The beautiful like mosaic toasts.
Yes, like their black sesame toast I love. Also, Saravana Bhavan, which is a South Indian chain that's on 26th and Lex. I used to live there when I moved to New York in 2004 in that neighborhood, and they do an amazing South Indian breakfast, which is super fun on the weekdays because it's all like Indian tourists visiting New York who need Indian food for breakfast. And then I love Golden Diner, their Thai Cobb salad. I just am obsessed with.
Those are all such great restaurants. I love this. I'm going to show up for breakfast.
Yes.
Your favorite New York City bakery?
Okay, again, can't choose one, but for pastries, Der Pioneer, which is in my neighborhood in Kensington, I have a weekly breakfast date with my husband there. Amazing, like German, Austrian pastries. And then for bread, Runner and Stone, their buckwheat baguette, I love, and Bianchi, their miche, and also their croissants. And I mean, anything from any of those.
Your go-to bodega snack?
I would say bacon, egg, and cheese on a roll with ketchup and hot sauce.
Nice. A piece of like kitchen wisdom or a kitchen hack that you learned from one of the instructors that you think more people should know about.
Yeah, so simple thing that many of our instructors do is they grate their garlic on a microplane or in a grater for their recipes. And sometimes you need to chop it or slice it for how a recipe's supposed to turn out. But I just love that because it's fast and it often helps the garlic just sort of spread into the food.
Mm. A now closed restaurant that you wish you could bring back from the dead.
Yes, Tiffin Walla, which is a South Indian restaurant on like 28th Street and Lex that was there when I lived in that neighborhood in the like mid 2000s. They had an incredible $5 South Indian lunch buffet. And
Buffet?
Yeah, it was a buffet.
Wow.
Yeah, that was so fresh and always had like changing dishes. It was a dream.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Finally, a fictional food scene like from a book or a movie that you wish you could eat in real life.
Yes. So, oh my God, I'm mixing up the name. It's the Ang Lee movie from the 90s. It's like Eat.
Eat, Drink, Man, Woman.
I was like, not Eat, Pray, Love. That's the other one. No, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. Actually, so I saw that movie when I was like 13, and the father is this chef who makes this incredible home-cooked Chinese food for his 3 daughters. And actually, I think that planted a seed that kind of one branch of it grew into the League of Kitchens because it created, I think, in my mind, this fantasy of how incredible home-cooked food could be that was different from a restaurant, that you could just have these feasts. And yes, I would want to eat. I would want to eat in that movie.
Me too. And I think even though there's not a Chinese instructor in this book, I think maybe the soul of that lives on.
Totally. I mean, that was my dream. And like, I feel like that's the League of Kitchens. When you go to any of these instructors' homes, and all of our workshops start with a homemade meal, it's like that. It's amazing.
Well, it's been so fun talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. This is so fun.
And to close this episode, we hear from Chef Rogelio Garcia to tell us about his new book, Conviví, Modern Mexican Cuisine in California's Wine Country.
Hi, I am Chef Rogelio Garcia. I am located in Calistoga in the Napa Valley. I'm inside the Four Seasons at Michelin Star Restaurant Oro. My cookbook is Convivir, Modern Mexican Cuisine in California's Wine Country. So my book is unique because it's a take on Mexican cuisine in the Napa Valley. I grew up here. I made a lot of connections. Napa has supported me throughout my career. And be able to take it from a lens of a chef that grew up in Northern California, but the roots are Mexican, is those twists where I used local seasonality, but also respecting the traditions of Mexico. The biggest inspiration of writing the book was that growing up in Napa, I think that, there was a lot of times that I kind of felt lost. Most of the restaurants were cooking out of Europe, France, Spain. There was a little to no representation of my roots. And so for the last 10 years, I've been researching Mexico, talking to historians, reading books, talking to my mother. She had a lot of amazing stories growing up in Mexico City. How, the culture is, the holidays, and I think most of the point is the people. How they're willing to give so much where they don't have a lot themselves. And so that inspiration kind of kept building up. In the last 4 years, I've dedicated myself to writing Convivir. The team did such an amazing job. Definitely went through a lot of trials and tribulations with them. A lot of learning, a lot of rejection as we were trying to gear up for the book. But seeing it for the first time and seeing it at a bookstore for the first time has been such a phenomenal milestone in my career. The first time I got to see the book was super exciting. When I got the call, I want to say it was the month of June of this year, from the publishers and said, I got the first copy. I literally dropped everything and drove about an hour to get the first copy. I walk in the room, they were clapping, they were giving me hugs and just, just super, super proud. but actually holding it and seeing it come as it was, I never thought that I would have something or even create something that will live way after I was gone. And so, you know, I have two boys, right? So they're gonna be here after I'm gone. But to have a book, it's quite the feeling. Recipes that I would love people to kind of take a look at. I think one that I grew up with is the spinach tortitas. That's something that my mother cooked for me as a kid, and I think till today I love spinach. They're these almost fritters, if you will. Eggs, flour, blanched spinach, kind of chopped. There's a little bit of cheese, and you just lightly fry them in a pan. Crazy good, exceptional. Brings me back to my childhood days, and it's definitely a homage to my mother. The other recipe, I would say, one of my favorites, maybe not on the healthier side, it's chicken fried tacos. Chicken is fried, obviously. It's got this beautiful tortilla that's handmade. And when you bite into it, you get this bright avocado tomatillo sauce. What best thing to put together, which is tacos and fried chicken.
This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.